Welcome, everybody. Welcome to GAIN's Neurodiversity Expo. I'm delighted to be your host this afternoon. I'm a member of ISC's Neurodiversity Working Group and a passionate advocate for diversity of thought in our workplace. I actually believe that we all have a responsibility to enable a diverse, representative, and resilient, with success, workforce. In actually being lucky enough to be doing well, I believe we all have a moral obligation to give back, and in doing so, we have to take it upon ourselves to inspire and nurture the diverse talent. GAIN is passionate about unlocking the potential of autistic and neurodiverse people, which obviously they can bring to the insurance, investment, and financial services industry. Today, we are delighted to be taking you on a journey that celebrates human potential and diversity of thought. A journey that actually reminds us all that nobody can drive this change just by themselves. For this matter, we need to enable a community that takes on, supports, connects, and inspires this talent. Today, we will be hearing from Vic Mazonas, who's the general manager of GAIN, as to what it takes to be a member for GAIN and also the ways in which we can all be involved. But first, I'd like, with great pride and pleasure, to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Dame Stephanie Shirley. Dame Shirley is a workplace revolutionary and successful IT entrepreneur. She arrived in the UK in 1939 as an unaccompanied Kindertransport refugee, and in 1962, she had actually founded her own software house, a company called Freelance Programmers, that introduced new work practices as well as helped to inspire and change as a catalyst the position of professional females, particularly in the IT industry. Dame Shirley has won a number of high-profile awards, particularly the most coveted Companion of Honor, an award that's limited to just 65 individuals the world round. And that's due to her incredible services to the IT industry, as well as neurodiversity and the rest of her philanthropic activities. As you will hear, she is a champion for neurodiversity through her own charity that's called Autistica. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dame Shirley as she shares with us today.
My name is Dame Stephanie Shirley, Steve Shirley. I made my reputation and my fortune as a pioneer of the computing industry. I was a woman in a world where women were paid less for the same work, patronized constantly, and promoted only reluctantly, deemed incapable of responsibility. I've first-hand experience, like many women of my generation, of what it's like to suffer discrimination in the workplace. And it's made me deeply committed to ensuring that others don't suffer in the same way. In 1962, I set up one of the first high-tech companies in Britain. Freelance Programmers was a company of women, for women, a software house which recruited professionally qualified women. The company became a success, a painfully slow success to begin with, but it eventually made me, along with many of my staff, a millionaire. Some, at least, of our success was down to the fact that we were also pioneers of diversity in the workplace. Though, to be accurate, we had no workplace as such, since in our earliest days, we employed only staff working from home. We pioneered the concept of women going back into the workforce after having children. And to accommodate them, We pioneered the most flexible approach possible to pay and employment. Eventually, in 1975, legislation designed to level the playing field for women had the ironic effect of making our pro-female employment policies illegal. But by then, we'd made our point. We were a fine example of what women in the workplace could achieve. We were a standing reproach to the prevailing discrimination, and we were a showcase for the benefit of management flexibility. We were pioneers and effectively positive ones of diversity. Our son Giles was born a year after the company was founded, and it soon became clear that he was autistic. Autism, as I'm sure you know, strikes at the very heart of what we mean by human. People on the autism spectrum may experience a failure to interact or relate socially, an inability to use language to communicate, and an obsessive desire and need for sameness. So it's a spectrum condition. Some people with autism are profoundly learning disabled. Others are able to study and to enjoy subjects from the sciences, mainly computing and maths, and the arts. Autism is one example of the neurodiversity which society has increasingly come to recognize. The many ways in which human beings diverge from some hypothetical norm. Neurodiverse people have valuable and employable skills, yet many remain extremely vulnerable, finding it hard to get into employment and to make friends. So, why employ autistic people? And how should you go about it? There's a business case for diversity in any company's employment policy, and it's especially strong where autistic and neurodiverse people are concerned. What's often seen as an obstacle is just as frequently an opportunity. There's an ethical case for improving the recruitment and employment of autistic people, but there's a pragmatic case as well. A neurodiverse workforce is a better workforce. That's because autistic people possess qualities which can be positively valuable. Let me dispel some of the misleading stereotypes about autism. Yes, a few autistic people are blunt-speaking mathematical geniuses, but by no means all are. Yes, many autistic people struggle with social interactions, but not all do. Yes, some autistic people are good at repetitive tasks requiring concentration and attention to detail, but some find them boring, unchallenging, and unrewarding. And while people on the autistic spectrum tend to flourish in a structured environment with an emphasis on routine and cope badly with an unexpected change, they can also be extremely good at thinking outside the box. People with autism have strengths that include accuracy and attention to detail, reliability, an excellent memory for facts and figures, persistence, and a logical approach. These are all things from which your organization can benefit. They're good at tasks which involve systematizing, precision, and thoroughness. Some have an extraordinary capacity to hold information when solving a problem. Many can intuitively recognize patterns or errors in large data sets. A fine eye for detail can be a real strength. And people on the autistic spectrum often have a wonderful ability to focus, to hyper-focus. And as for their ability to socialize with their fellows, some autistic people function very well in customer-facing roles, especially if they involve a lot of imparting information and advice. And women especially often become adept at what's called masking their autism. And unless you know them extremely well, you might not recognize them as autistic. There are, of course, challenges in employing people with autism. Managing them is not easy, but then management is seldom easy. You need to understand the particular difficulties your autistic employees face and how to mitigate them. Autism can make any or all of the five senses very weak or very strong. Many autistic people are hypersensitive to some stimuli, such as bright lights and noise. Most of us don't notice the buzzing of the light tubes. Some people on the autistic spectrum hear it so loudly as to exclude everything else. So special lighting might be needed, or tinted lenses to filter out the frequencies causing the problem. And perhaps also headphones, so to block out the noises that wouldn't worry me, but are excruciating for them. A minor adjustment can make a major difference. One American corporate estimated the retrofitting costs at just $200 per autistic employee, $200. And some people with autism find that they just cannot function in an environment which is not rigidly controlled and predicted. Sensitive employers should try to be clear and unambiguous in the instructions they give autistic employees and avoid sudden changes in workload flows or tasks and in the expectations they place on their staff. Many staff who don't have autism will welcome that as well. The aim of adjustment is to minimize anxiety. For people on the autistic spectrum are great worriers, worrying about being late, worrying what to do at lunchtime, worrying about what people are asking of them. Consistency in the workplace helps to resolve such issues. Paradoxically, meeting the autistic person's need for rigidity and structure requires flexibility and flexible thinking by the employer. Autistic people find being in large groups very stressful. A small, stable group or one-to-one working is best. A designated workspace, not a hot desk, is needed. Then too, perhaps people on the autistic spectrum have an honesty and directness in speech which can easily be misinterpreted. And employers should make sure that other staff are aware of that and do not leap to judgment. They shouldn't necessarily expect autistic staff to engage in the banter and gossip and general sociability often associated with the workplace. To many people with autism, this kind of thing is baffling. They do not see the point, and they cannot read the verbal and non-verbal cues involved. They struggle with what had been called the hidden social curriculum of the workplace. And half of people with autism have experienced bullying or discrimination in the workplace. So it's important that you and your staff are aware of that. One idea that seems to work is to give autistic employees a buddy or mentor, someone who can help them navigate the complexities of the organization and of social relationships. The buddy can also help by translating, as it were, the autistic person's requirements for their colleagues. Good autism practice is good practice for everyone. After all, one would or should identify appropriate tasks for all members of staff, so doing it for autistic employees is merely an extension of that. But we also need to see with new eyes, and we also need to modify our ways of working rather than expecting everyone to adapt to standard work environments. In general, employers should aim to shape the job to the individual, not the autistic member to the job. Something else others among your staff will probably welcome. One hurdle autistic people face is getting a job in the first place. Typical recruitment processes may be inaccessible for many. Unclear application forms and the fact that interviews often operate as a sort of test of social ability as much as an ability to do the job can disadvantage autistic people and make it harder for them to demonstrate their suitability for a role. Employers should perhaps take the opportunity to rethink their approach to recruitment in ways which may help not only those on the autistic spectrum, but other job candidates too. Job interviews can be a source of great stress, amounting to, at times, to real distress. They require interaction, eye contact, and often responses to abstract questions. Far better is to have a practical trial of an applicant's skills, the modern equivalent of a typing test. This concentrates on what people can do, their strengths, not their deficits, and the specific talents, often unrecognized, that come with those differences. And here too it works well to give the applicant a mentor to help them get through this process. The barriers for employment for people on the autistic spectrum are not a lack of skills or enthusiasm or the absence of the motivation to deploy their lives in a useful way. Rather, it's the abstract concepts, the appropriate communication, or an inability to interpret nuance and language, to hear what many of us pick up even though it remains unspoken. That's what hampers their entry into the workforce and their progress through it. There are some companies that employ exclusively people with autism as IT consultants, data coders, and data quality checkers. The first major corporate to do so was the international software company SAP in Germany. That was in 2013. In the UK, GCHQ has deliberately gone out of its way to recruit autistic staff whose pattern recognition abilities are relevant to the centre's tasks. Companies such as Microsoft, the consultancy firm EY, and the insurance giant Willis Towers Watson have also deliberately sought to hire autistic people and develop programs and practices that allow them to do that so well. SAP insists its policy is not about social responsibility or philanthropy. It's about gaining a competitive advantage. Microsoft argues that it's stronger when it expands opportunities and employs a diverse workforce that represents its customers. People with autism, the company says, represent a reservoir of talent and strengths that can be used as, that phrase again, competitive advantage. Several organizations with policies like these report remarkable success stories. JP Morgan Chase discovered that after less than 6 months in the company's mortgage banking technology division, people on the autistic spectrum were doing work of a standard and complexity it took neurotypical employees 3 years to reach. Some were more than 50% more productive. And they can also, as I've said, be innovative and original thinkers. An autistic member of EY's accounting team put it this way: once I put my mind to something, lots of ideas start shooting out of my head and I'm able to come up with creative ideas. The insurance industry could certainly recruit those with autism for roles in data and technology, digital marketing, risk and compliance, quality assurance, actuarial tasks, claims and underwriting, and loss adjustment. That list came from Gain's own website, so it should be right. There's an excellent overview of the whole subject in Adam Feinstein's book, Autism Works. Among the autistic employees cited are Tom Illand, who had a successful career as a certified public accountant, and Oliver Leonard, a young accountancy clerk at a practice in Hastings, whose employer says of him that he is professional, hardworking, and liked by all the staff who work with him. Perhaps you can help me with other examples from your own organizations. My advice is not to balk at any short-term expense, but to concentrate on the long-term value of having a loyal and skilled colleague. Why worry about the differences when often they amount to little more than thinking about the same thing in different ways? Above all, don't think of autistic employees as a challenge, but as an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dame Stephanie. That was an extremely inspirational speech. Making a case for diversity in the workplace is indeed both an ethical and a pragmatic one. So very right. Also, competitive advantage is indeed measurable. I'm now taking the opportunity with a great amount of delight to introduce Vic Mazonas, the General Manager for GAIN, who will actually take the time to explain to us what it means to be a member of GAIN and also the ways in which we can all be involved. Followed by Catherine Knowles of Cura Insurance, as well as a roundtable between Ms. Appleby of GAIN, Lizelle Appleby of GAIN, apologies Lizelle, Ian Smith of Zurich, as well as Micah Liebenicht from BP. Thank you.
I'm Vic Mazonas, General Manager of GAIN. I'm autistic and I have CPTSD. We know that adverse life experiences in the workplace are very common for autistic people if we're able to secure work to begin with. And a decade ago, the trajectory of my life was following a familiar path. A mental health crash I now recognise as autistic burnout resulted in me losing my job because my employer was unable and unwilling to meet what were actually quite minor accommodation requests. Unable to make it through the interview stage for the new roles I sought, I turned to temporary and freelance work to make ends meet. For me, the insurance industry gave me an opportunity I never expected. There, for the first time, I was genuinely encouraged with my whole unalloyed self to work. My manager was open to my needs. My team appreciated my personality quirks and made space within the group for me. Small accommodations like headphones and quiet spaces were met without difficulty. And when adverse life events occurred, my employer's medical cover paid for therapy and my manager rearranged my working hours and my workload around my therapy schedule. Suddenly, I went from surviving to thriving. I was getting praise, recognition, and promotion for my strengths. I was performing well and taking on extra projects. And I found myself co-chairing a workplace neurodiversity committee where I had the opportunity to bring the conversation to people higher up in the business. I got lucky. I found a great manager who built the work around his team and who was willing to go to bat for us when he needed to. And I realized I didn't want anyone else to have to rely on luck to find that. I wanted the entire culture of work to change. Gain wants to transform the insurance, investment, and financial services industries. We're working with corporations like Swiss Re, Zurich, Aviva, Marsh, and others to provide them guidance and a roadmap on how to support neurodiversity in their workforce. Our aim is to help them make structured, concrete changes to their company culture, to their office norms, and recruitment practices to make them fantastic places for neurodivergent people to establish careers. We're partnering with organisations like Ambitious About Autism and Lexic, who have the expertise and experience to educate and support companies and individuals. We'll be working collaboratively with our partners, having conversations as a group to share knowledge with each other and build connections. We'll be helping partners match up with the companies that need them, and we'll help you find organisations you may want to work with too to meet your goals. But we do also want to work with you as individuals. Some of you are already working in the insurance and investment industries. You'll be aware of the fantastic potential for great careers, but also the challenges of thriving in a workplace that doesn't have the knowledge or the culture to let you bring your whole self to work. We want to help you build communities of your peers, empower you to push for the changes you need, and help you get access to guidance and resources to make the most of your neurodivergent self, both in and out of work. And I'm sure you're aware of the power of mentorship, and one of our longer-term goals is to establish peer support and buddy schemes so that neurodivergent people entering the industry can get guidance from people who understand it and understand the challenges of navigating it as a neurodivergent person. For those of you seeking opportunities, we're launching community spaces, workshops, and educational content with our partners. We'll help you find the right organisations who can give you access to career opportunities, to resources and support. Over time, this will expand into more targeted services, such as a career club where we can give you a regular digest of the latest opportunities offered by our partner organisations and, where suitable, member companies. We also want to provide support, guidance, and networking opportunities for parents of neurodivergent children and allies to the neurodiverse community. I know that if GAIN had existed when I was leaving university, my life trajectory would have been very different. I want to help build something to ensure other neurodivergent people have access to better resources, peers, and support. And I really hope you'll join me and help us build it together.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today. So I think I'm mainly here for two kind of key parts, really. So the first one is myself as somebody who is neurodivergent and also as an employer, and to give a bit of a view of those different parts, really. So I was diagnosed as autistic last September at the age of 36. And it is something that I've masked incredibly well through my life. And the main thing I want to probably try and get across is the fact that, as with anything like this, we should never make assumptions. Now, obviously, I've got a very late diagnosis, so I've not had to handle many stigmas in terms of autism. And part of my autism is that I really struggle to accept praise and to internalize that kind of thing. So to actually list all the things that I've done and have done well at is quite hard for me to do. But it's very important in this kind of a situation to do that. So to obviously let people know a bit more about me. So as I say, I am autistic. I also have a doctorate in business management, specifically systems thinking, cybernetics, and social networking. I have owned my own business for the last 10 years, and we're not huge, but we've grown from about 11 people to 24 people. I also now have a second business too, where I'm training other people in our industry to be advisors and to hopefully do really good options for protection insurance. I am seen as a leader within the protection insurance space, especially for people with mental health, and starting to get towards the neurodiversity side of things as well. But I work a lot with charities. I'm currently an ambassador for Parkinson's UK as well, because that is something close to my heart, because my dad has that. And I do lots of different things. As many people will know, if you're a business owner, you pretty much do anything and everything that needs to happen. But in my mind, with my autism, I started off in compliance. I am a compliance person. I will just put that out there. I know that it's always the fun part of our side of things. It works really, really well with my mind. I'm analytical, I'm systems thinking, I see processes, I sometimes see black and white, but I can remember a lot of what needs to be done and what can't be done. I was looking for the risks. And then that led me into being an insurance advisor as well. And probably going against quite a lot of the stereotypes that a lot of people would think. I am incredibly creative. I'm very artistic. And I do think outside of the box a lot. And also against a really big stereotype as well. With autism, it isn't necessarily that you are just not empathetic. You can also be too empathetic. And that is something that I struggle with. And it's something to maybe be aware of as well if you do have any colleagues that you know are autistic and they're maybe not seeming like themselves, especially during lockdown when they've been forced out of their regular routines. And then also in terms of world events. As an example, for me, I can't watch the news at the moment. I can absolutely read the news at times where I can monitor what I see and what I don't see. I cannot cope with seeing the pictures and the videos of things that are happening in the world at the moment. My visual memory is incredibly strong, and I go into what's known as catastrophic cycling with autism, where you can't get images or you can't get thoughts out of your head. And it's not having voices in your head or anything like that. It's just that you have so many neurons that are working that in a sense you can't shut down the process in the sense. In terms of being an employer, it's very interesting being an employer. And it kind of fits in. I do this the same for everybody and treat everybody the same for myself. And I have to say my team probably cursed me with this a little bit. But part of my autism that people may not always think about is that I'm incredibly sensitive to smell. Very, very much so. I was saying to somebody the other day as well, this, because they're just like, oh yeah. I was like, well, actually, I'll tell you an example of why I'm so incredibly sensitive and how you'll know. I have 3 children. And my eldest was prone to ear infections when he was a baby. And I could smell his ear infections. So I would know I would have to take him to the GP because he had them. No one else could smell it. I'd literally be getting his ears and shoving them under other people's noses and going, can't you smell that? And I had no idea at the time that I was autistic, but I was like, something, you know, and I'd know. So we live at a seaside resort and I do ban fish and chips from the office. Nobody's happy about that. They do count down the days till I'm not in the office so they can have fish and chips for lunch. But what's lovely is that they all respect that. They know that it makes me feel incredibly ill. And I think having those open conversations, and I know obviously as the boss, it's kind of like I could just come in and dictate that. I have to say I have kind of dictated that. But I would do that for colleagues as well. You know, if someone said to me, I can't have this in here, well, then that's fine. You know, I can't cope with that kind of lighting over there. Okay, then can we move you somewhere else? There are so many things that we can do. I also have a number of people in my team who are neurodiverse. Different to me, they're not autistic. I have quite a few members of my team who are dyslexic, and they are absolute geniuses in their fields. They might not have got all your standard GCSEs, but in terms of graphic design, absolutely spot on. Computers in the IT systems, have somebody who can read computer language better than the majority of us will possibly read English, but yet can't necessarily do the English side of things and how we would usually structure words and sentences. And so I think a big thing for me when we are looking at as employers is when we're setting up those CVs and what we need to see, we're saying to people, this is what I need for a job spec. Do we really need that? In some ways, you know, is it absolutely essential that we have people that need to have degrees or different things like that? And obviously degrees are lovely. I mean, I'm not going to knock them. I have them myself. I've gone higher than that. And I think it's lovely. But is it really essential for the role that you're promoting? And in terms of the insurance industry and financial services as well, I do know someone personally who did try to enter our space. And they were dyslexic. Lovely, lovely person. And our exams are not set up to support someone with dyslexia, even if they are given the support structures that are deemed as suitable for people that are dyslexic. And there is a very, very clear problem there about helping people. And that's really difficult as an employer as well. If you take somebody on in that situation, you're trying to support them, but ultimately the exams, the qualifications and everything are just going to be unattainable. And that is something as an industry we need to work on. But as an employer, what I would always say is that I would hope that you would have some kind of a culture where people feel that they can come and speak to you. There's always this thing as well of people thinking, I think it's that scared of the unknown. You know, sort of, well, what's going to happen if I take on this person that's autistic? Well, they're probably incredibly productive and efficient and far more, they're going to get through things far quicker than someone who isn't in their special field. You know, we have to make sure that when we think of certain conditions, I think we kind of have an image in our mind when we think of a condition, and it's usually something that's being stereotyped by the media, by films, by TV. And what we need to do is be open and realize that isn't what everyone is who has that condition. With autism, there is an absolute scale of things, and it can be quite hard as well. I have to say, I don't want to push time too much, but it can be quite hard as someone as well if you are recently diagnosed. So if someone is recently diagnosed, try and give them as much time and support to adjust to that. Because I was obviously, let's say it wasn't that long, I'm trying to think for it, it's 9 months ago now. And when I was diagnosed, obviously I'm the boss, and I was apologising to everyone constantly. And I was just saying, I'm so sorry if I've gone ahead if I've like jumped, I'm really sorry. You know, I've jumped trains of thought. You know, just forgive me. I'm autistic, and I just kept announcing it to everyone all the time with almost every conversation, because I was really paranoid all of a sudden that I was doing something odd, whereas I never felt that I was doing something odd. But in terms of my mind, I will look at a system and I very quickly see the patterns. I see the holes in patterns. I see holes in communication structures. So I will go off and very, very quickly down certain routes. And then everyone else is kind of looking at me just, sorry, how has she got there? What's gone on? And then I have to specifically think to myself, right, I need to go backwards and make sure that everyone catches up to me. And that's really hard to manage because it can almost seem a bit blunt. It can seem sometimes a bit rude, as if you're dismissing people. And it's making sure that you have good processes in place so that everyone involved, the people who are working with the person who's neurodiverse, they know what their manner is, what might happen if they suddenly start to have the symptoms, if they're in a certain mindset as they're going forward, and how to help them, and not to take anything personally. And then also for the neurodiverse person to know how to best communicate with others. Because for me, I can do that. And at times I'll very quickly realize, oh, I need to go backwards. And then other times I can get a bit frustrated because people haven't seen what I've seen. And I think just having that really open communication with as many of the team as possible, depending upon how much the person wants to share, can be incredibly useful.
So welcome everybody. My name's Lyselle Appleby. I'm one of the supervisory board members of GAIN, and I'm really pleased to be joined today by Ian Smith from Zurich and Micah Levenich from BP as we explore ways to create a neuro-inclusive workplace. Firstly, I'd like to welcome Ian Smith, Operations Manager for Zurich. Ian has worked within insurance for almost 20 years and is a change and transformation leader. Ian recently completed a Cranfield Master's degree with his research focused on how the insurance industry could recruit, train and retain neurodiverse talent. Thank you for taking the time to join us today, Ian. We really appreciate it. Secondly, I'd also like to introduce Micah Levenich. As a neurodiversity expert, Micah leads BP's global neurodiversity program. Prior to this, she worked in the investment industry as in management team for almost 20 years. Receiving a diagnosis of ADHD in 2017 made her reconsider her career, and she decided to focus on making neuro inclusion happen. Thanks, Micah, for giving us your time today. We really appreciate it. So let's start with a question for Ian. We'd like to take a moment to hear from Ian about his journey of discovering he is neurodivergent and how this has helped him to understand his role within the workplace. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Lyselle, and thanks again for giving me the opportunity to come and talk about my story and also to support anything that I can with neurodiversity within the workplace, within insurance and also the investment industry. So thanks very much for the opportunity. My journey, I suppose, started with my eldest teenager when she was let down by CAMS. She did self-harming and had gone into a spiral of depression, and we weren't sure what it was, but CAMS kind of dismissed her until one day she decided that she was going to take an overdose. And at that point, I felt I had to go down the private route to try and get her some help and support, because the NHS just wasn't able to give her the support that she needed. That led us to a long and protracted route to getting an ADHD diagnosis, something we'd never thought of previously. And as she was getting her diagnosis and we were ticking the boxes, there was things that kind of resonated with myself, and I think I'd do some of this as well. Then my eldest teenager started to look and go, well, there's quite a few similar characteristics for her and for me, and we both all gone down the same route. There were so many things that just ticked the boxes, so I went down the route as well to try and get the diagnosis. So I finally got 2.5 years later through the NHS. I got my ADHD diagnosis last year. I'm in the final stages of my autism journey at the moment to have that confirmed, but I've got one appointment left, so I think I'd say it's a given that I have that. I think what is the key drivers from getting the diagnosis or the realization of understanding of whatever it is actually understanding what my quirks are. And sometimes when I do speak my mind, well, I now know why. And when I'm feeling that I'm really hyper energized and I want to be dancing in the middle of the room at the center of attention, I know why. But also I now know why I just want to sit in the room at the back and just be introspective and reflective on what it is and what I'm doing. So I suppose if I think of the workplace and how this has helped me to understand my journey, where I'm going, it kind of helps with looking at the ADHD piece first, the patterns of behavior. That if it's something that I'm really interested in, I can hyper-focus, I can thrive into it, I can really engage. I'm the most engaged employee you will ever have, because I'm driven and motivated. It's something that I really want to do. But what I am great at is being a project manager. And this may sound ridiculous because I have no concept of time. That's an ADHD thing. But because I have no concept of time, I plan everything out to within an inch of its life. And I have some of the most detailed project plans you'll ever see, which I can then track towards. The autism inside me then goes, we're not delivering. Why are we not delivering? And what does that do to my time management? So I've also learned how to manage risks and identify risks and anything that will track us off. So the characteristics of my personality that can cause me to struggle have actually helped me to excel in a field where nobody would ever believe that I could excel because of the time management skills.
So I'm pleased to hand over to Micah Blevnich as she shares how businesses can thrive by employing a neurodiverse workforce.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and hi everyone. So pleased to be here. So how can business thrive by employing a neurodiverse workforce? I think it's becoming more widely known that the differences in neurological setup or brain wiring, they come with distinct strengths, and they rank from process structuring, as Ian has just mentioned, all the way through to creativity. So there's tremendous potential and really, really sought after skills on offer there. And often those skills are things that come very easily to ND colleagues and neurodivergent colleagues, but other people find them really difficult. So there's really an add-on, a huge opportunity for firms if they get the inclusion bit right. And yet, I think neurodiversity doesn't rank that highly on a lot of firms' D&I agendas. And one of the reasons probably is that neurodiversity is invisible, or quite often invisible. And many firms also underestimate the size of their existing ND population within their workforce today. Overall, it is estimated that the global population has a prevalence rate of 15 to 20% neurodivergent people. And therefore, we are all going to have a lot of ND colleagues already among us in all regions and all business areas. But this is often underestimated, and quite a few firms think, oh, okay, we're going to look at gender first and ethnicity, and then later on there's neurodiversity. But neurodiversity never comes in isolation. It always intersects with other areas of diversity. There's, for example, here, a female with ADHD. We've got people on the autism spectrum of all ethnicities. So by looking at neurodiversity, you can provide a boost to your DE&I agenda. And also, what is quite often ignored or not known is that if you do not manage to create a neuro-inclusive environment, you force your divergent thinkers, your people with dyslexia, with autism, ADHD, and so on, to operate in a neurotypical way. But that's not their natural way of going about things. So they have to bend over backwards and deliver to neurotypical expectations. And that can be, well, first of all, it's not good for your confidence if you have to mask all the time and pretend that you're someone you're not. But also, it requires a lot of time and effort to apply an approach which is not your natural one. And if we think back to the prevalence rate of 15 to 20%, and then those employees spend a substantial time of their workday on masking and pretending and communicating in a neurotypical way to deliver to neurotypical expectations, then this actually has a huge knock-on effect on productivity and also company performance. And that is something which I find is often, not considered enough. And I would really, really recommend firms to create a neuro-inclusive environment to make full use of the skills which are out there. Just to give a brief example, I once had a line manager, and he somehow was a little bit uncomfortable with my ADHD approach. So when I'll, for example, work on a presentation, I put all the information I need into this slide deck. And to everyone else, it looks massively chaotic. It is color-coded. There's all sorts of information absolutely everywhere. There's colorful circles and squares, and it just looks to other people as if the whole thing had just exploded. To me, it totally makes sense, and I get it, and this is how I work. And even though it may look to other people as if, I've only just got started and this is all happening by coincidence here, I know that I'm actually 5 minutes away from being done entirely. But my manager didn't feel comfortable, and it actually made him quite anxious, and it somehow led him to conclude that if my presentations was being work in progress are this chaotic, then I can't have any other aspect of my life under control either. And so to make him feel less anxious, I then adopted a more neurotypical approach, a more structured approach, and I ensured that the presentation looked okay and presentable towards the end of the day, for the sole reason of calming him down. And this robbed me of my creativity, and it slowed me down substantially. And that's a shame. So we had a result which was worse than we would otherwise have had, and we achieved it more slowly. So the skills are out there, and there's tremendous opportunity, but we can only access the skills. Firms can only access these skills if they create a neuro-inclusive environment, if they create an environment where it's okay to operate in many different ways, to learn, to think, to experience the world in many different ways. There's no one size fits all. There's a one size fits one, and that's, I think, the approach, the way of thinking we all have to consider and adopt to, and also construct our workplaces for.
Thank you, Michael. It's really lovely to hear your story. We have a second question for you, if I can just ask you that. We would welcome any guidance to enable neurodiverse individuals to access support in the workplace. And what kind of support do you think could be available to help people bring their whole selves to work?
So yeah, there's of course the option to establish individual adjustments. For example, assistive technology solutions, read aloud apps for colleagues who are dyslexic, or more flexible work arrangements to avoid that somebody has to commute during rush hour, and so on. And that's a great starting point, but individual adjustments only ever help one single person in a specific situation. And also, we can only ever reach those who have stepped forward and who have disclosed, i.e., those who are aware that they are neurodivergent, and who can articulate their needs. And I think, especially in today's workforce, we've got quite a lot of people who got a diagnosis later in life. So you've grown up masking your differences. You have trained yourself up to fit in, and suddenly getting a diagnosis does not mean that you totally understand what your needs are, let alone that you can actually verbalize them. So that's another challenge there as well. And therefore, individual adjustments are, of course, great, but we think differently 24/7. And that's why firms also should address their standard work practices. And this includes the standard HR processes, recruitment, retention, year-end appraisals, for example, giving feedback, promotion criteria, the overall promotion process, and so on and so on. So those processes which are usually owned by HR. And then there's the everyday work situations, like how do we hold neuro-inclusive meetings? How do we ensure that our communication is neuro-inclusive or neurodiversity friendly? The great benefit of following that approach is also that a lot of the adjustments you would make for ND brains like mine or Ian's, they benefit everyone. If it's a simple example again, autistic colleagues massively benefit from clear communications of deadlines and expectations, massively benefit from sending out action points after a meeting, for example. But it's probably fair to say that it's hard to find somebody who does not like that. So yes, ND colleagues really benefit, but everyone likes it. So by making the workplace more neuro-inclusive, we actually have a broader benefit, and that is something we can all benefit from.
Ian, I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that at all. Just reflecting on what businesses can do to just help neurodivergent individuals to be able to bring their whole selves to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I resonate and everything you're saying, maybe I think it's good points. One of the things that I think was coming out of my research was around universal design and changes to recruitment processes, changes to job crafting, etc., that benefits everybody, not just the individual, which is exactly the point that Nick was making there around it's not just enough to design for the individual. Let's make changes that benefit everybody. I think one of the things that we look to recruit for experience and not for skills. And yet we're excluding so many people because we are recruiting for experience. Which, if we then tie that into the competency-based question, so one of the things specifically of autistic people, because of the way the literal interpretation of some of the questions means that you could have a fantastic candidate come through a paper who would be the best fit, the most qualified, and yet when it comes to a competency-based interview, they fall apart. Now, it takes a really good and skilled interviewer to be able to see through that the questions aren't being accepted in the right way. So I think there's lots that HR teams can do, and moving away from competency-based questions, which, if I take alphabet, for example, I know we've spent millions on perfecting the competency-based questions. But what does that drive? It drives a social setting to testing this social engagement and whether or not they can interact. It doesn't actually test if they're ever going to be any good in the job that you're hiring for. You just ask them what they've done in the past. And it's not necessarily a good fit. So I'd absolutely love back with you on everything that you said then, Mika. I think there's some really great thoughts that we've got. And kudos to you for making progress.
Thank you, Ian. That's a really good insight into what businesses can do. And I believe we've got a further question for you, Ian, if that's okay. I believe you've just completed an MSc thesis research on how the insurance industry could attract and retain neuro-minority talents. We'd love to hear your conclusions, your findings, and your experience at Zurich of how neurodiverse individuals can enable a business to thrive, and how managers, colleagues, and HR can play a vital role in supporting these employees. Over to you, Ian.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I was first to say thank you to Zurich. They suggested that I went through a level 7 apprenticeship in business and strategic leadership, which included the Crownfield Masters. So that was wonderful to do a level 7 apprenticeship through them. The timing, I mean, when I first started the course, my thought process was, why don't I do a thesis in project management? But as I went through, and this was perfectly aligned with when my daughters got their diagnoses and then I got my own, I started thinking, well, okay, so what would this look like in terms of how do we hire? But it's not just how do we hire, how do we attract neurodivergent talent to insurance? Once we've attracted them, how do we hire them? Then once we've got them, how do we train and develop them? And make sure that we retain them, that they're rewarded in the same way. So it was a really nice piece of work, which I wish I'd been able to take it on and do a doctoral study, because I think it's such a wide and broad topic, because there's so much that comes out of it. So I'll give you a few of the highlight figures from what I found. So I went out to the insurance community in general for a sample size, did a survey and some interviews off the back of that just to try and gauge it. Most of my people that I approached were from employee resource groups, so there was already an ally network of managers and like-minded individuals and people who want to promote this. So I'm going to caveat it with some of the research I found is out of line with other research that was done by the Institute of Leadership and Management. So let me give you that first stat. So the Institute of Leadership and Management found that 50% of managers would not hire a person with a neurodivergent condition. This was in 2020. Because I went to the allied networks, effectively for looking at this, 85% of recruiting managers would actively recruit somebody who has a neurodivergent condition. So this in itself is brilliant, because actually this is proving one of two things. One, managers don't know enough normally about neurodivergent conditions, and therefore they shy away from them. Two, the power of allyship coming through, and this isn't just from minority conditions, but for any of our diversity and inclusion topics that we have, that becoming an ally and supporting is really important going forwards for people who don't have conditions, just to get knowledge and understanding. So what I found, even within this group though, was that 85% of the recruiting managers had no knowledge of neurodivergent conditions. So if you've got no knowledge of them, and if I put myself in their shoes 3 years ago, I knew what ADHD was, but I didn't know what it meant. I'd heard of autism, but didn't know what it meant. I knew what dyslexia was because I had that, so that was okay. But actually not knowing it is a big barrier. So I think when you take that into consideration with the likes of the ILM reporting out and saying that 50% of managers wouldn't hire, and you've got 80% of autistic employed adults and not in employment, 92% of autistic people, minority people, felt that they would be unfairly treated within the recruitment process. 92%. That's a huge percentage. And you have to stop and go, well, why? What is it that is going on that is not helping us to feel that we're being treated fairly? And you can grind that, and the reasons are stigma, because people don't understand. They just see Rain Man and they think that is an autistic. Of course, Rain Man was not based on an autistic character at all. So if that is the only world's understanding of autism, or you see these awkward characters in TV shows and movies that just represented as the geek in the background who just doesn't fit in. And but when you do see them in movies, they're always the smart ones, the intelligent ones, the ones who will come up with the solutions at the end, but we're painted in a really bad light. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do to try and help challenge some of the reasons for why there is no trust in recruitment. Recruiters who advertise jobs that don't exist, just so that they can get people through the door. Employers who have already filled roles. Recruiters never coming back and responding to CVs, not getting any feedback on how we get through. There are so many things that link in to lead to this lack of trust in the recruitment process. And just as a comparison, 48% of neurotypical employees within the survey also have no trust in the recruitment process. That for me, that's the process that's broken. That's a recruitment level, at employee level, and then you so one of the things that we as employers have to do is look at how do we address that and how do we actually make it more attractive, more safe to actually get people through the door.
Thanks,
So,
Ian. That's absolutely great. We really appreciate your insight into and the hard work that you've done in your research to help the insurance industry understand that there are hidden needs. There's masking, as Micah mentioned. There are really things that we can do to make the environment more inclusive for neurodiverse and neurotypical people alike, to bring their whole selves to work. And I think that's a key part of it. Everyone should have the opportunity to be able to be comfortable in a safe environment and to thrive in the workplace and be all that they can be. So that's amazing, Ian. I really appreciate that, and Micah as well. Have you got any final thoughts, either of yourselves? If you'd like to share about with everybody this afternoon. Particularly, we're looking at individuals in the workplace and individuals who are seeking to work in insurance or investment or financial services. Over to you, Ian, if you want to make any thoughts, and then over to you, Micah, as well.
yeah, the likes of Lloyd's with their diving initiative for raising awareness of neurominority conditions. It's a great time to get into the industry. There's a lot of work going on in the background to certainly improve how do we look at improving cognitive diversity within the insurance market. And I think there's so much more that we can do. Hints and tips, if I could give any tip to any employee anywhere out there at all that's going to do some recruitment or is managing any neurodiverse people, look at double empathy. Look at Milton and the double empathy problem. If that's something that you can understand and get your head around, which is that autistic people and neurotypical people just do not speak the same language. Doesn't mean that they're any less stupid than you are or don't know any less than you, but if you have two chief executive officers talking to each other, one is from England and one is from France, and neither of you speak English or French, you know that you have the same background, the same experience, the same knowledge, everything aligns. But if you have the CEO who speaks English and the CEO speaks English but is a neurominority, it's specifically autistic, background similarities, everything may be the same, but you may not actually understand each other. And that's a really important point to focus on. So if I give anything to anybody who is hiring, looking after minority groups, please go and read about double empathy by Milton. It's a really great theory around how you can communicate more effectively with autistic people within the workplace.
And Micah, any final thoughts from you?
We've talked a bit about recruitment and getting into the industry. So I think I'd like to just mention one thing, because a lot of people are not aware of their bias when it comes to interacting with neurodivergent people. It is perfectly fine for everyone's brain to pick up on somebody not making eye contact or communicating in a different way, or looking at the wall or the floor whilst collecting their thoughts and so on. It is normal to notice those things. Our brains are error detection machines, and if something deviates from the norm, you would, of course, notice it. But what is not okay is that this observation then overrules everything which is great about the person. And that's something which is unfortunately still quite prevalent today, where people think, oh, okay, this person, yeah, they were great technically, but they never ever looked at me. I somehow felt a bit uncomfortable. So I would like to get people or encourage people to get better at recognizing their bias, admitting that they've got this bias, and actively working towards it. And then I think that takes us quite a few steps to leveling the playing field when it comes to recruitment in particular.
That's really great. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time this afternoon and to share your thoughts. And it's been such an inspiration. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Micah. And we look forward to hearing from you again at another event shortly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. That's been extremely valuable. We love the tips. Double empathy it is. So well said, Ian. And indeed, exactly as you also said, it's a great time to be entering our fabulous industry. So great as is and exciting as is to hear from personal neurodiversity stories in our industry, I would also like to take the opportunity to thank very much Vic for being able to share how GAIN is hoping to be able to create a lasting change for ND individuals in our industry. And this is exactly where we need each and every one of you. So please do follow us on this journey. By joining together, we can create this unique single voice that is able to support the neurodiverse and neurodivergent individuals coming into our industry, or indeed provide a better support as they are inside the industry as it stands right now. And pulling together by signing up, it's all free, we can all do it. We can utilize either the QR code that's just popped up here, or indeed the website address, which is gaintogether.org/sign up. Please do that. At GAIN, we are very proud about the community, and we would love to hear how we can actually all work together to amplify the positive actions we are taking. As a matter of fact, we'll soon be sharing a little poll, a poll with a very simple question for everybody to take the opportunity to answer. And that's exactly what you can see right now on the screens, which is how can GAIN best support you? There's a few options. Please take the opportunity to complete that within the next 10 minutes. We will be having a little break. And we will be sharing, of course, the results by the end of the session. Also, when we're back from this 10-minute break, we will all be able to choose one of the 3 workshops via breakout rooms to hear from IND partners, founding members, as well as key employers, how they are planning to support, and they're indeed currently supporting or implementing support mechanisms for IND individuals. This is going to be the opportunity for everybody to choose from 3 workshops. We will come into the detail after the break that represent insurance, investment, and the wider financial services industry. Thank you, everybody. See you in 10.
Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello, everybody. We're currently on a 10-minute break. Once we're able to resume, I will hit the floor explaining the 3 workshops. I hope that makes sense.
Got it, Vina. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that 10 minutes was not too long or not too short. So in a few minutes, we'll be able to see all the 3 workshops we have available. What's going to happen in them? Well, there's going to be partners from the insurance, investment, as well as financial services industry to basically talk to us about those highly valuable skills, and also many of them in short supply, as well as ways we can support ND individuals. The workshops will be first the insurance workshop, the second one will be the investment one, and the third workshop is the financial services. Each session will last for 20 minutes, and the people who are leading will take the opportunity to share, as well as mention any questions and have an open discussion with everybody who chooses to participate. Hello again. I'm not quite sure whether my video is showing up, but nobody needs to see my pretty face once again. I think you probably had enough of it by now. Apologies for anybody who's actually cut short or didn't manage to sort of add to it. I really feel that we needed so much more time to fully open up, although the key messages were indeed voiced loud and clearly. We are now, and thank you, big opportunity to also say thank you before we forget and move on to the masses and masses of important things we'd like to discuss, one of which is indeed the results of the poll question, which is how can GAIN support you best? And there they are. I don't know whether you can all read them. I will be reading them out, I think, and I will be using the power of my little tiny mobile phone here to zoom in. So top 6, starting with the number 1 priority, is the advice about employment and adjustments. Second comes the exploring the career possibilities in the industry, followed by finding or attaining employment through our partners. And the last 3 are support and advice for family members of a neurodivergent individual, diagnostic services available through our partners, and guidance on how to become an ally. Can I just say personally, I'm delighted because how we can become allies is featuring last, and clearly because we know exactly what we need to do. It also takes me back to the discussion from Dame Stephanie, who basically said that making a business case for diversity is indeed a pragmatic and an ethical one. So I can see an awful lot of pragmatism on your responses to the poll, especially when it comes to really nailing it down to how can we really make this change. Yes, we can unite. Yes, we can create a stronger community, but ultimately the devil is in the detail. And that takes HR processes to be restructured, edited, tweaked, whichever word you prefer, in order to make sure that people feel safe, they can bring the full self to work, and we can really create this fantastic, thriving environment where people can fulfill their own aspirations and be best utilized in a work center. Obviously, this is going to be shared. Any other questions you might have, especially for, as I said earlier, for those of you who didn't manage to sort of finish or share the final few thoughts in the little breakout rooms we had. Please, any questions that go into your chat, you can probably see I've been semi-active in it, but I can promise you we've been copying and pasting, and we will be getting back to the individuals, especially when it comes to any outstanding points. And that's it. Perhaps, if I can, leave you with the one quote that really resonates, and that is from Alexander Den Heitzer, who basically says that if a flower fails to bloom, you have to fix the environment, not the flower itself. There you have it. Thank you very much. Special thanks to all the participants, the speakers, the leaders who were on this call, on this expo today. Thank you so much for your time. But also, thank you, everybody in the audience who have persevered the last 2 and a bit hours and who have basically voiced your concerns and your aspirations together with us. And I can feel the commitment, I can feel the vibes that we will make that happen because we know it needs to happen. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. This was amazing.
Thank you very much.